Interested in the fact that all three of you are kind of working with nature in slightly different ways and talking about relating to nature in slightly different ways as well. So I think Jeremy, you spoke about this idea of deep sympathy and deep love. Carole, you spoke about collaboration, and Amy about the commons. And I was kind of interested to just hear a little bit more from you about what does it mean for you to design genuinely with non-human animals or entities? How do you recognize their agency? And similarly as well, like what kinds of knowledge as a designer do you need to kind of draw on to do that? I mean, is it science? Is it something else?
Sorry, I made a humming noise, but I didn't. I'm happy to. Shall I start? Anybody else want to go? Just a couple of things pop into my head when you said that. Hybridity, I think, is one of the first things that I'd want to emphasize. So it's not just that we can choose to design with, but just by sitting here and being a biological organism, we're with something. You know, I mean, we know from biomedical research that modifying a person's gut bacteria can change your personality. So we're working with a whole lot of different forms of life right now. That's just part of being a body. And there's this Enlightenment narrative about, this is what Charles Taylor calls the buffered self, that I am a kind of self-contained thing, it's just me in here, nothing can come in and invade that space, and it's just not true. So, you know, when we think about being with others, I think it may help to just acknowledge that that's where we are to begin with. The other thing I'd just add, and I'd be curious to hear what two of you think about this, I think we need to reconcile ourselves to killing. And I think I'm working with Val Plumwood, who's an environmental philosopher here, just to say that if we're going to do biomimicry, like you've suggested, I think part of that is, in fact, there's a cycle to ecologies. Things die, things are killed. There are ways to do that which are cruel, and there are ways to do that which are humane, and I think we can attend to that, certainly. But to try to avoid killing anything, I think is just going to completely stymie and prevent us. So it's about thinking about reflecting on that and the tragedy of it and the complexity of it, but doing that and grappling with that in a real way. And that will involve grappling with decay in the way we design, grappling with the passage of things, passage of ourselves, like integrating all of the different aspects of death and dying and killing morally.
Maybe you want to respond to that?
No, I agree with what you're saying. I think for me the difference in terms of collaborating with nature is that we are part of nature, but if I collaborate with someone else, we can have a conversation. And it's usually through conversations, you can bounce back ideas, you can agree, disagree, and you can evolve a whole strategy. When I work with plants or myceliums, I can't have a conversation with them. I do talk to my plants, but I know so that means I have to be a lot more considered. And I have to think ahead, okay, if I do this, how will it respond? What will happen? Whereas if I have a conversation, it's much more, kind of immediate, much more. So I think it sets a different tone in that collaborative spirit, is that you have to really be considered and think about what will be the response of the organism based on the conditions you set it to live in. And you have to try and preempt and look at potential scenarios. So it's a lot more considered than I think, and maybe I should actually adopt that principles when I collaborate with a human. I don't know, but it's always, I find that because it's a non-human, I need to really think it through before I do something with it.
I think it's interesting seeing Carole's beautiful work, which is so immediately with the non-human. I think in my way of thinking it is much more abstract, but also maybe in my gut. I mean, I don't think I necessarily need to know how many millions of species are becoming extinct or go and see it for myself to feel that there is something deeply wrong about how we live and provide for ourselves. But I suppose I'm just thinking my slide of the Fashion Commons, I strategically chose a very beautiful image of a meadow, so maybe I'm in trying to share that kind of idea and trying to promote it. I suppose I'm appealing to a kind of imaginary people's that kind of a romantic idea of nature, and maybe kind of use that, kind of strategically, kind of quite interested in designing with imaginaries to take people to a different place. So it's much more abstract in my way of thinking.
I mean, I guess like one of the things as well about this topic is it's so complicated and it can be very overwhelming. And one of the things that kind of struck me is I think Carole and Amy, with your work in particular, thinking a lot about craft and that kind of making process. I was just interested in a little bit as well about, from your experience, how that kind of very hands-on thing has opened up for you, thinking about working with, you know, with living systems and with the environment.
I think through making. And so for me, you know, when we talk about design practice, for me it's not, although I have to consider and think ahead and set up my experiments, it's actually as I develop my experiments that new ideas come, and then actually, you know, so thinking through making is for me as valid whether you work with living or non-living systems actually. I think that's how we develop new things. So it's with know-how, using my hands to make, and using my textile knowledge to actually work with living systems and try and transfer this traditional conventional technique with something that's living.
And I suppose the thing that kind of connects is that when I'm intervening in a cardigan, very important work that must be done by everybody, I'm having a conversation with the knitted fabric. So Carole was saying that you need to work with what the mycelium wants to do, or kind of design with its, or not, whatnot. I can't impose a design kind of blankly on an existing garment. I need to negotiate with it and see what it wants to do. And so that's a kind of conversation. I could talk about the stitches of a knitted fabric each one being a unit of possibility. So I have to talk to those little units.
That's nice.
Brilliant. Right. Well, so I think now's a good time to open it up. So does anyone have any questions? So yeah, we've got one down here. Yep.
Do you think going back to local and more craft-based initiatives, would that be a more sustainable way to do things rather than
You're going to first.
You did the first one. That sounded like it was for you.
I mean, the debate over anthropocentrism, I think, has been an interesting one, and that's been raging for 40 or 50 years in environmental philosophy, starting with deep ecology, I think, in a lot of ways, which kind of made that initial argument that we need to kind of get outside of thinking just like anthropos all the time. The trouble with that, of course, you know, even if you want to think like a mountain, like I think John Muir might have put it, you're not a mountain. And this has been, I think, uncovered. It seems a little glib, but this has been uncovered, I think, in a new field that's being called multi-species ethnography, where you know, critical scholars are trying to work with other creatures in ways that both of you just described it, in a meaningful way, which acknowledges the difference of the other in order to really acknowledge and understand the other. Right? So on one hand, we do definitely want to decenter the way that we think about where we fit in the natural world. It's not just all about us, which is very obvious now since the whole world seems to be falling apart, because we've been thinking that way for so long. But on the other hand, it is about just settling into being human and recognizing that that's a kind of limited frame and trying to kind of reach to the other, just like you've been saying, like with mycelia. Trying to reach into that space in creative ways. I've got a colleague up at Edinburgh, Michelle Bastian, who's got a book project on this. It's really good, which I would recommend to anyone who's interested in thinking about participatory research with more other than humans, which is really important, I think, space to walk into. Over to you for craft.
I think for me, craft is central and pivotal to reconnect and re-engage with both our social communities and sort of our natural, non-human communities. I think it's always a point of conversation. Craft is about sharing by default. It's about understanding what you're working with. So I think for me, craft is pivotal to that conversation.
Yes.
Okay, so we've got a question up there. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, hi. Well, my question was about, I suppose, the mycelium or maybe slime mould, because it feels like we need to become super literate in the kind of world of slime mould. So I'm just wondering, obviously you're working with animate materials, and then you're also talking about the risks involved. I mean, this is just a question from a novice, really. What are some of the kind of possibilities that could go wrong with mycelium, or how if it commingles with something else or adds to the lab environment?
Oh, so mycelium is all around us. It's around you all the time, at all time, even in the city. And mycelium is, if you don't know much about it, I recommend a book called Mycelium Running by Stamet. Mycelium is one of the most extraordinary organisms on the planet. It's real, it's natural, it's not a GM organism. And it's actually what connects trees together, what helps trees and forests survive, particularly in relation to climate change, because there's an exchange of nutrients and information via mycelium. So it's an incredible organism, and there's no particular risk. When I work with it, the only risk is, of course, if you look at, there are thousands of different kinds of mushrooms. I only work with edible version, simply because just risk assessment and health and safety, just to make sure I don't, kind of risk anything that's because I don't work in a lab environment. But in a lab environment, you could actually take a bit more risk. But there's no risk of. I mean, it is in nature. It's found in nature. That's where you get it from. So there's no risk in that sense at all. And so when I work with it, when it's grown to a shape or whatever I want to do with it, you bake it to kill it, so that you're left with what it's made for you. So there's no risk as such.
I suppose why I'm asking, I'm just thinking, because you brought up the brilliant question of, again, it's this kind of designing with control, but there's no sense that there's issues out of our control that we'll discover further along the line. That's the point we're making.
No, it's not the point I was making. No, what I was trying to say, and I apologize if I wasn't clear, but it's more like, sometimes I try and guide a mycelium to go there and then do this to create a pattern. And it refuses. It wants to go there. And so it's more in terms of control, in terms of, patterning techniques and fabrics. Or sometimes it does something that I didn't expect it to do. But it's never a threat as such. It's just, it's part of, but to some extent, I think it's like gardening. You could be, gardening, and then suddenly one of your salad will do something that will shoot up, and you think, why has this one done this, not this one? So it's also, I think it's applying principles of gardening to design tools. It's actually learning how to look after something that's living to try and get what you want out of it. But it's not going to jump in my face. It's fine. It's safe. The scalability is what I'm always asked about. There are more and more people working with mycelium, so there's more and more companies now producing commercial mycelium as products. I do different work with mycelium. This one you've seen, I've just finished it. It is scalable, but it will take a bit more time. I need at least another year to develop and test it. It needs to be washable, so you need to do all of this before it actually can be applied in industry. I wouldn't upscale myself. I would license it to someone else. And the answers to really help, I think it depends how many people get onto biomimicry. If it's just a few people doing it, it's not going to make a big difference. But if everybody starts to look at where, biomimicry is looking at 3.8 million years of evolution on the planet, where those solutions to problems have evolved for a long, long time. And the more we can learn from them, the better. There are more and more companies adopting biomimicry principles to develop new products. But I think it's still a bit of an unknown and a bit of a mess. And I think we need more people to get into biomimicry to really make a difference.